Hello, this is Sarah. I'm going to read you Camila's story today, which goes by this title. My brother and his expectant wife would be living in my large house while I moved into a tiny apartment, so my parents were packing up my belongings when I got home early. They chuckled and said, "You don't need that much space." Grinning, I dialed the cops. "All right, let's leave." I'm 35-year-old Camila, and I work for a sports nutrition firm as the deputy CEO. I'm frequently asked why I haven't gotten married yet, as if I'm flawed. In all honesty, I'm not interested in a committed relationship at this time. Right now, my life is going fairly well. Last year, my 28-year-old younger brother, Jake, tied the knot with his fiancée, Sarah. No one was shocked when they eventually got married because they had been dating for years. As a wedding present, I gave them $15,000 because I was really delighted for them. Even with my pay, that's not change in my pocket. However, I wanted to assist them in getting married because Jake is my brother. The actual wedding was pleasant. Jake couldn't stop smiling, and Sarah looked stunning in her outfit. The reception was held at a hotel downtown, and the ceremony took place in this small church that our family has been attending for ages. Before the family began their typical foolishness, everything was going well. "Camila, when are you going to settle down?" In the midst of the event, it was my Aunt Linda. Aunt Karen remarked, "You're the only unmarried person in the entire family now." As if I was unaware of that beforehand. My mother also stepped in. "It's time you heard the sound of little feet in that big house of yours." As usual, I nodded and grinned. I was praying inside for the fortitude to endure this without losing it. These folks behave as though being unmarried is a sickness. I'm content, I have my own home, and I have a fantastic job. What else are they looking for? Shortly after the wedding, Jake and Sarah moved into our parents' studio apartment. The nicest aspect is that they don't have to pay rent, and it's modest but respectable. They essentially got it for free from our parents. Every month, Mom requested me to help with utilities, so I've also started paying their gas and electric bills. Helping relatives doesn't bother me, but occasionally I question whether they value it. Following the wedding, the first few months went smoothly. When we had family dinners at our parents' place, Sarah always seemed to be kind and pleasant. She would inquire about my employment and thank me for helping with the payments. I felt that we had a good relationship. To get here, I put forth a lot of effort. I began working when I was 16, attended college, and then spent 13 years moving up the corporate ladder. I was ultimately promoted to Deputy CEO 3 years ago. The pay is excellent, excellent, excellent. I also purchased my own home 2 years ago. With 4 bedrooms, a lovely kitchen, and a backyard, it's spacious and cozy. I deserved every inch of it. It took months to find a home. I searched several of locations before coming upon this one. It's just what I wanted, in a nice area and convenient to my place of employment. I felt like I had truly succeeded when I signed the documents. I had paid for this house, and no one could take it away from me. When I originally moved in, I handed my folks an extra key. I thought it was only fair to give them a key in case of emergency after they assisted me in moving some furniture. After all, they are my parents. I had total faith in them. Every Sunday, our parents host family meals. Since Jake and I were young children, it has been a custom. We used to eat breakfast before school, and now we all gather at the same table. We catch up on the week as Mom prepares chicken or pot roast. Generally, it's okay, just typical family fare. However, things have been shifting lately. During these dinners, Sarah has been giving brief remarks. Just clues here and there, nothing too overt. She'll talk about how their studio feels small, or how lovely having so much room must be. Everyone knows she's talking about me, even though she never mentions my name. "It's so unfair," she complained while chopping her chicken last month. Single people get these big houses while married couples squeeze into tiny apartments. As if she were making great sense, my parents nodded in agreement. I understood precisely what she was doing, but I acted as though I didn't get it. I didn't like the direction she was taking with the setup she was doing. The problem is that their apartment isn't all that horrible, in my opinion. It's free, even though it's little. They just pay utilities, which I assist with, rather than rent or a mortgage. For a bargain like that, most couples their age would kill for it. Sarah, however, gives the impression that they live in a ghetto. At first, I made an effort to disregard the remarks. I didn't want to create a fight over nothing because family relationships are difficult. But the clues continued, each one less subtle than the last. When Sarah surveyed their flat or commented on how much space I must have for activities in my home, she would sigh. Jake began to participate as well. He would say that they hope to have children in the future and that children require room. When he stated that, he would stare at me as if I were expected to make a suggestion. But I put a lot of effort into my home. Furthermore, I'm not going to feel bad about owning wonderful stuff. My parents' reactions to all of this are the worst. They nod in agreement with all of Sarah's statements. Just by living in my own home, they act as though I'm being self-centered. They seem to have forgotten that I have been providing them with financial support for many years. I covered Jake's utility costs. I assisted with their wedding. When my parents needed money, I gave them a loan. However, I refused to give up the house I have worked for 13 years to purchase, so I guess I'm the selfish one. No one appears to care if the reasoning is flawed. When I went in my parents' place for Sunday supper 3 months after those signals began, I sensed a change. Everyone was behaving strangely. Like they all had a major secret, my parents kept looking at Jake and Sarah in a significant way. Sarah's smile would not go away. This was not her typical courteous smile, but rather a broad one that gave the impression that she was going to break the news. Jake continued to caress her stomach in this protective manner. I'm not a moron. I was well aware of what was happening. As I watched them, I thought, Sarah is pregnant. During supper, they will make the announcement. In fact, I was pleased for them. Sarah appeared like a nice mother, and Jake has always been good with children. The family would benefit from a baby. Given that they would have other things to concentrate on, perhaps it would even put an end to all of the remarks on my single status. As usual, we all took our seats at the supper table. The entire house was filled with the aroma of Mom's excellent pot roast. However, Jake cleared his throat and called for everyone's attention before delving in. He reached for Sarah's hand and said, "Sarah and I have some news we want to share. We're going to have a baby." My parents, who presumably already knew, began to shed joyous tears. Dad grasped Jake's hand as if he had won the money, and Mom sprung up to give Sarah a hug. I said, "Congratulations, I meant it too." "That's wonderful news." Mom had to spoil the moment, though. She added, "Well, at least one of my children is giving me grandchildren," while glancing directly at me. I was starting to think I'd never get any. I refrained from speaking. This was not the time to argue about my life decisions. It was Jake and Sarah's turn. I simply grinned and gave them another congrats. Sarah turned to me at that moment and smiled sweetly. "I've really been discussing something significant with Jake and your dad, Camila. It has to do with the way we live. We all concur that the housing in our family isn't allocated equitably." I gave up chewing. "What do you mean?" My dad and Jake were nodding as though this made perfect sense. Sarah continued, her voice growing more assured. "You live alone in that big house with all those empty rooms," she said. "Meanwhile, we're crammed into a tiny studio apartment, and soon we'll have a baby who needs their own room." "Okay," I murmured gradually. "What does that have to do with me?" Mom stepped in at that point. "You must behave like a true sister, Camille. You must demonstrate your affection for both your brother and your prospective nephew." "How exactly do I do that?" Even though I was beginning to feel nauseous, I inquired. Mom replied, "You should give your house to Jake and Sarah, as if it were the most obvious remark ever. They need the space more than you do." I gazed at her. "Are you serious right now?" Dad went on, completely serious. "You would take up residence in the studio apartment currently occupied by Jake and Sarah. We're even prepared to formally declare it. We'll sign the studio over to you after you give Jake your house." I glanced at everyone at the table. They took it all very seriously. In fact, they believed this to be fair. "No," I said as I got out of my chair. "Absolutely not." "Camila," Mom remarked in a piercing tone. "Don't be so selfish." Selfish. What I was hearing was unbelievable. To pay for the house, I worked for 13 years. I kept every dime. I deserved it. "You're just an old maid who'll never get married or have kids anyway," Dad said. "What do you need a house like that for?" I felt like I was slapped by the words. I was called an old maid by my own father. Jake made the decision to add even more. You're being greedy, Camila, he responded. Family is supposed to help family. Greedy? I chuckled, but not in a joyful way. You received $15,000 from me for your wedding. Every month, I cover your utility bills. What specifically am I greedy about? Jake said, that's different. I said, no, it's not different. I'm sick of you all assuming that I'm the issue. I'm sick of you showing more love for Jake than for me. Mom said, that's not true, however, her voice sounded unconvincing. Really? I said, then here's a solution. Offer your studio flat for sale. Purchase a home for Jake and Sarah with that money as a down payment. The issue has been resolved. My parents exchanged glances. When Dad stated, we can't afford a second mortgage, I answered, then live within your means, and reached for my handbag. Don't dream about taking my house just because you don't want to spend your own money. They weren't finished with me, so I made my way to the door. Mom yelled, Camila, you're being ridiculous, after me. Selfish, Dad continued. Greedy, yelled Jake. I made one final spin around. This talk is over. My decision to keep my house is definite. I drove home after leaving them sitting there. Upon entering my home, I took in all I had worked so hard to achieve. The cozy couch I'd been saving for months. Every morning, I eat breakfast at the kitchen table. The large windows in the bedroom allow in the ideal amount of morning light. I called this place home. I had earned every inch of it. Furthermore, I would be damned if I gave it to anyone who didn't believe I deserved it. All they wanted to do was label me selfish. They might accuse me of being avaricious, an old woman, or anything else that sprung to mind. However, I was maintaining this house because it was my. I sat in my living room, enjoying a cup of tea while gazing out into my backyard. I felt totally at ease for the first time in months. The world had not ended when I had rejected their absurd proposal. My phone began to ring around 7 a.m. the next morning. Mom was there. I didn't respond. Dad called next, followed by Jake and Sarah. I pretended nothing had occurred and ignored them all as I prepared for work. I got perhaps 20 text messages and 12 missed calls before midday. At last, I ate my sandwich in the office break room and read them. Camila, we must speak. You are acting irrationally. Mom said that. You must assist your brother. Dad said, family comes first. What you said caused Sarah to cry all night. Jake said, you're causing harm to a pregnant woman. I believed that your affection for me was sisterly. I suppose I was mistaken, Sarah said. Without replying, I erased all of the messages. I refused to continue playing their game, even though they wanted me to feel bad. For the following 3 days, the calls continued to come in. One of them was attempting to wear me down every time my phone rang. They also left voicemails. More dramatic than the prior one. This is your mother, Camelia. Your self-centeredness is ruining our family. It's Dad, Camelia. You have let me down. We didn't raise you like this. It's Jake, Camelia. The tension you're producing is having a negative impact on Sarah's health. You are responsible if something were to happen to the baby. I was pretty annoyed by that final one. They were now attempting to hold me accountable for Sarah's pregnancy issues, as if a miscarriage might somehow result from my unwillingness to give up my house. It was deceptive and absurd. I showed my coworker Lisa the texts. She has worked with me for 8 years and is well familiar with my family's circumstances. As she received Jake's SMS regarding the baby, she questioned, are they serious? They're actually trying to guilt trip you with that? Apparently, I said. According to them, I'm single-handedly destroying a pregnancy by not giving up my house. That's insane, Lisa remarked. Are you aware of that? You are not at blame for any of this. I said, I know, but hearing it from someone else was satisfying. They just want me to feel bad enough to cave. Lisa responded, don't you dare, with firmness. You put a lot of effort into that house. They are not entitled to it. As the week progressed, the SMS messages became increasingly inventive. They began sending me articles about the value of supporting family members and the necessity of family loyalty. A Bible scripture about loving your neighbor was forwarded to me by Mom. A tale about a woman who sacrificed her home to support her sister was forwarded to me by Dad. He remarked, this could be you, beneath the story. You could be the hero of this story. When I read it, I burst into laughter. Hero? They asked me to sacrifice all I had fought for in order to be a hero. That was not a brave act. That was foolish. The worst messages came from Sarah. "Your nephew needs a room, and don't you want him to have a good life?" was one of the notes she wrote on prenatal pictures that she gave me. "Is this really where you want your family to live?" She even captioned a photo of their little studio that she gave me. She was living there for free, and I wanted to text her back, but I refrained. Responding to any of their communications will just motivate them to continue. The calls and messages eventually began to decrease toward the end of the week. Perhaps they had given up and accepted my choice, I reasoned. I ought to have been more aware. I went to work that Friday as normal, but I began to feel ill about midday. I felt like I had been struck by a vehicle, and I also had a temperature and a headache. I informed my supervisor that I needed to leave early since I wasn't feeling well. I drove home from the workplace at around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. As soon as I came into my driveway, I realized something wasn't right. Murphy's Moving Service was emblazoned on the side of a large moving truck that was parked in front of my house. The truck was parked just behind my parents' vehicle. My heart began to race. What on earth was happening? When I entered my own home with my key, I was astounded by what I saw. Inside, my parents were packing my belongings. While Dad was removing books from my shelf and placing them in boxes, Mom was covering my dishes in newspaper. "What the hell is going on here?" I yelled. Both of them leaped as if they had been caught stealing, which I suppose they had. Mom responded, "Oh, Camila," in an attempt to be informal. "We thought you were at work." "I asked you a question," I continued, attempting to sound calm. "What are you doing in my house?" Mom remarked, "We're helping you move," as if it were the most commonplace thing ever. "Jake and Sarah are moving in here, and you're moving to their studio apartment." My voice grew louder as I responded, "I told you I wasn't doing that. I told you a dozen times." As he packed the books, Dad added, "We all decided you don't need this much space," without even raising his eyes. "It's not fair for you to have all this room when they're about to have a baby." "I don't care what you decided," I said. "This is my house." They simply continued packing as if I hadn't been there. Mom placed one of my sweaters in a box after folding it. Dad put a picture frame in his pile after wrapping it up. "Stop," I commanded. "Stop packing my things right now." "Camila, don't make this harder than it needs to be," Mom advised. I lost it at that point. I contacted the cops from my bedroom upstairs. I said to the dispatcher, "I need to report a break-in. People broke into my house, and they're packing up my belongings." She questioned, "Are you in immediate danger?" "No, but they're stealing my stuff, and they won't leave." "We'll send someone right away." It was 5 minutes before the cops arrived. I recounted the scenario to the 2 cops who approached the door. My parents attempted to pretend that there had been a miscommunication. Dad said, "Officer, this is our daughter. We're just helping her move." The first officer said, "Did she ask for your help?" "Well, no," acknowledges Dad. "Did you grant them permission to enter your home, ma'am?" the officer asked me. My response was absolutely not. I told them repeatedly that I'm not moving anywhere. The cops exchanged glances before turning to face my parents. "Sir, ma'am, you need to come with us." "This is ridiculous," Mom yelled. "She's our daughter." The second officer said, "That doesn't give you the right to enter her home without permission." Dad swiped at the cops as Mom began to scream. My parents were taken into custody in my living room. The moving truck crew hung about looking perplexed as I watched them being escorted away. "What about our stuff?" said one of the packers. "Put everything back where you found it," I said. "And send the bill to whoever hired you." I remained in my kitchen after everyone had departed, trying to take in what had transpired. After breaking into my home, my own parents attempted to evict me. In fact, they believed that they could just determine what was best for me and make it work. My phone rang 2 hours later. From the police station, Mom was phoning. "Camila, you need to drop these charges," she responded. "Your parents are us. We only wanted to assist." "No," I said. "I'm done with all of you." She said, "You can't be serious." After saying, "I'm completely serious," I hung up. I chose not to dismiss the charges when I visited the police station the next morning. My parents were able to handle the fallout from their behavior. I had had enough of being a doormat. That night, my parents posted bond and were released from custody. It didn't surprise me. They were wealthy and had no criminal history. The fact that they didn't call me soon away surprised me. I assumed they would be incensed and want to shout at me further. Rather, the next morning I received a call from my grandma. She sounded worn out and anxious. "Camila, your parents are very upset," she responded. "They can't believe you actually had them arrested." "They broke into my house, Grandma," I said. "They were packing up my belongings without my permission." She said, I know. I also informed them that you had the right to keep your home. But it's a big matter to call the cops on your own parents. What should I have done?" "Kindly request that they refrain from taking my belongings." The words, "I don't know," she said. "Everything about this is a disaster. However, you cannot allow this to ruin your family." When I said, "I didn't destroy anything, they did this to themselves," Grandma let out a sigh. "Perhaps you are correct. However, they remain your parents." "Are they?" I inquired. "Because it is the duty of parents to care for and love their children. All these folks want is to take advantage of me." 3 days passed before I heard from anyone after I hung up with Grandma. In fact, the quiet was pleasant. No demands for my house, no guilt-tripping texts, no irate calls, just calm. Then, however, I received a letter in the mail. My mother wrote it on her elegant stationery in her meticulous calligraphy. "Camila," it stated, "we have made the decision to disown you after careful consideration and consultation with your father and brother. Our daughter is no longer you. Your self-centered behavior has demonstrated to us your lack of concern for your family. You put a house before your own family. We don't want you to get in touch with us again, and we won't be contacting you either." The signature said "Former Mother" rather than "Love, Mom." I placed the letter on my kitchen table after reading it twice. Instead of feeling sad, disappointed, or furious as I had hoped, I felt relieved, really relieved. They believed that I would be devastated by this letter. They must have pictured me sobbing and pleading with them to bring me back. All I sensed, though, was freedom. For the first time, I was not subjected to their incessant demands, criticism, or manipulation. After making myself a cup of coffee, I sat in my living room and gazed about my lovely home. My home, which I had saved for 13 years. Their avarice and entitlement nearly cost me my house. I experienced the most tranquil weeks in a long time throughout the next few weeks. I went to work, returned home to my peaceful abode, and did as I pleased. I was free from family strife, Sunday meals, and criticism that I was self-centered for leading a life of my own. Jake and Sarah were still residing in the studio apartment, according to rumors I heard. During one of our phone conversations, my grandma brought it up. She stated, "They're managing. The baby's due in a few months, and they're getting by." "What about my parents?" I inquired. "They're thinking about selling their house and the studio apartment," grandmother stated. "They want to use the money to buy 2 places, one for themselves and one for Jake and Sarah." "They could have done that from the beginning," I responded, "instead of trying to steal my house." "I think they just wanted to take advantage of you," Grandma muttered. "They didn't think you'd fight back." Well, they were wrong. My parents had been discussing this idea for months, as I subsequently learned. They had persuaded themselves that since I was childless and unmarried, I didn't deserve my home. They reasoned that I would be too kind to turn them down and too anxious to keep the family intact. They were mistaken in both ways. It's interesting because they might have asked me to assist them in purchasing a home for Jake and Sarah. I may have given it some thought if they had come to me like decent people, explained their predicament, and requested a loan or a gift. My family has always benefited from my generosity. However, they were unwilling to seek assistance. What they believed I didn't deserve was what they sought to steal. They intended to discipline me for my independence and achievement. I learned 6 months later that they had, in fact, carried out their plan. They purchased 2 smaller locations and sold both homes. My parents received a condo, while Jake and Sarah received a 2-bedroom apartment. Everybody was content with their new living arrangements. I was also pleased. I was still living in my lovely home, which I had worked so hard to get. People who believed I owed them everything I had earned were no longer a problem for me, and I still had my work and my freedom. I miss having a family sometimes. The thought of holiday get-togethers and Sunday feasts is something I miss. However, the continual criticism, manipulation, and sense that my work was never good enough are things I don't miss. Even if it's silent now, my life is mine. I live in my own home, spend my own money, and make my own judgments. No one accuses me of being self-centered because I'm successful. No one asks me to give away my hard-earned belongings to those who haven't contributed to their success. Through all of this, I've gained essential knowledge. Those who profess to love you might sometimes be the ones preventing you from moving on. Sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is to take poisonous individuals out of your life. By disowning me, my family believed they were giving me a lesson. They assumed that I would return clinging to my house, pleading for pardon. Rather, they showed me that I'm more resilient than I initially believed. They showed me that I can be happy without their approval. They showed me that it's not selfish to choose oneself. It's essential.